and to Jeane J. Kirkpatrick, American Ambassador to the United Nations, diplomat extraordinary, a public servant in the best Truman tradition. Her love of country, her plain speaking has added a new note in world diplomacy, and her devoted service to her president has helped blaze new trails in the implementation of American foreign policy. This award is given the 8th day of May 1984 by the Harry S. Truman Good Neighbor Award Foundation. Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. You want to see this?
Thank you very much, Mr. Steele. Thank you, Mr. Towles, governors of Missouri, Nebraska, my home state, Oklahoma, distinguished colleagues from New York, from Sutherland, Ambassador Keynote, Ambassador Blum, distinguished guests. Obviously, it's a very great pleasure for me to be here. And I'm deeply grateful to the Harry S. Truman Good Neighbor Foundation for having invited me and for giving me this award. I'm willing to claim almost any excuse for being associated with Harry Truman, who has always, quite literally, been my favorite American president. I think that what I'd like to do is talk a bit about him just from the point of view of one political scientist. To those of you who know so much more about him than I ever will. He is, as we all know, as my friend the historian Clinton Rossiter said, a man whom history will delight to remember. He was consistently misjudged by most of his contemporaries, resented by those who could not accept a style of leadership so unlike the elegance of Franklin D. Roosevelt, dismissed as a man far too small for the immense tasks which were required of him. Today, however, it is a rare American who does not take pride in a president whose life was so courageous, whose years of leadership were so filled with extraordinary achievement, and whose character was so resolutely, so thoroughly American. On April 12, 1945, after 3 months of largely ignored vice presidency, he became the occupant of that extraordinary office, which was then, and has for much of the time since then, been positioned in the very center of world affairs. As president, he was charged immediately with directing the efforts to defeat Germany and Japan in the terrible reality of World War II, constructing the terms of peace, rebuilding devastated nations of Europe and Asia, debating the course of post-World War II events with a determined erstwhile ally whose conception of the future turned out to be very different than those of the other allies. The courage, determination, distinctive style of leadership he brought to these tasks, and a great many other endeavors, provides us with a stunning and wonderful example of how an apparently ordinary person, how apparently ordinary people sometimes prove to be extraordinary historical figures. Today, even the favor which history has shown him leads many of us to draw the wrong conclusions about Harry Truman. He's now often appreciated as a man who grew in his office. Few would dispute that remark, since good men can and do grow in high office, and certainly Harry Truman did. But let us not, however, make the mistake of crediting his secure place in history to the presidency's capacity for ennobling men, because to do so would be to once again underestimate Harry Truman. Let us rather affirm that in the life of Harry Truman we have an example of the essential attribute of the United States, which I think was summarized by another great American, a longshoreman, who happened also to be an extraordinary writer, Eric Hoffer. Eric Hoffer understood this quality of America when he wrote, and I quote, "Only here in America were the common folk of the old world given a chance to show what they could do on their own, without a master to push and order them about, can be realized. And the lowly were not awed by the magnitude of the task," wrote Hoffer. "A hunger for action, pent up for centuries, found an outlet. They went at it, the Americans, with axe, pick, shovel, plow, and rifle, on foot, on horse, in wagons, and on flatboats. They went to it, praying, howling, singing, brawling, drinking, and fighting. Make way for the people." History made way in an absolutely unexpected sense for Harry Truman. The source of Truman's great strength of character did not reside in the office he held. It was there amidst his modest origins, failed businesses, blunt language, colorful sports shirts, the very physical ordinariness of the man. Harry Truman knew that men should not be measured by their birthplace or by their adherence to contemporary fashions. He believed we should all be judged by how faithfully we fulfilled our obligations, and in that endeavor, he advised us all to follow the advice of another famous Missourian, Mark Twain, when he said, "Always do right. This will gratify some people and astonish the rest." Harry Truman always, unapologetically, did what he perceived as right. He was an outstanding boy, a conscientious employee. He was an exemplary son and devoted brother. He was a model husband who, when away from his wife, wrote to her every single day of his life. Obviously, he was, as is demonstrated here, a loyal friend who, as John Kennedy once remarked, for whom, as John Kennedy once remarked, his best friends were his oldest friends. He was also a deeply patriotic public servant and an outstanding president. His greatness was based finally in his confidence that he had done his damnedest to recognize what was right and act accordingly. He judged wealth, esteem, security to be a poor substitutes for the personal strength derived from doing the right thing. In a White House memorandum, Truman wrote, "I wonder how far Moses would have gone if he had taken a pole of Egypt. What would Jesus Christ have preached if he had taken a poll in Israel? It isn't polls or public opinion of the moment that counts. It's right and wrong." Popular perceptions of Harry Truman as an ill-equipped, undereducated, roughneck ward politician were utterly inaccurate. A lifelong, serious student of history, literature, and music, Harry Truman was an enormously civilized man. In Dean Acheson's words, he had a wealth of historical knowledge and the ability to apply it to the problems at hand. Yet he never forsook the plain-spoken language of Independence, Missouri, or Kansas City. When discussing contemporary issues, he was fond of referring to what old Cicero or old Tom Jefferson had said about similar problems of their day. Lacking any sense of personal grandeur, Truman neither sought nor received recognition for his talents. All he asked for, after assuming the president, was to be a good and faithful servant of my Lord and my people. Columbia professor of history, a contemporary, Alan Nevins, wrote that Truman has an instinct for the right act in major affairs worth tons of formal education. But instinct alone does not sufficiently explain the astonishing volume of Harry Truman's accomplishments. He dreamed all the post-war dreams that were shared all over the world. And when those dreams clashed with post-war realities, he combined his idealism with an equally impressive realism and formidable intellect. Dean Acheson wrote of Truman's response to post-war challenges, "The president's task was reminiscent of that in the first chapter of Genesis. to help the free world emerge from chaos without blowing the whole world apart in the process. When the Truman government found its footing in foreign affairs, Acheson wrote, its policies showed a sweep, breadth of conception and boldness of action, both new in this country's history and obviously centrally planned and directed by his own mind and hand. The 1947 assumption of responsibility in the Eastern Mediterranean, the 1948 grandeur of the Marshall Plan, response to the blockade of Berlin, the NATO defense of Europe in 1949, the intervention in Korea, all those constituted expanding action in a heroic mode. All were dangerous, all required a rare capacity to decide and act. All were decidedly, rightly, and vigorously followed through. Harry Truman's approach to foreign affairs comprised good faith and good sense. With good faith, he joined others in providing an end to the World War II and planning for the post-World War world. He expected that the promises of Yalta would be kept, and when he needed to, he faced the fact that they were not. In his approach to foreign affairs, idealism and realism were warp and woof in a tightly woven fabric. With enthusiasm, he joined in the preparations for the founding of the United Nations and committed the United States to its support. Throughout his presidency, Harry Truman worked to strengthen the institutions of the United Nations and give reality to the dreams of world order. The point one of his inaugural address in 1948 was indeed that henceforth the United Nations should be the foundation stone of American foreign policy. He conceived and approved the Point 4 program as well, the first large-scale technical assistance program for economic development, providing some 2,445 U.S. technicians to some 35 countries. Point 4, he wrote, was not conceived as a lending program or as a giveaway plan. Its basic aim was to spread knowledge that will help others to improve themselves. Harry Truman entered his presidency with every intention of carrying out Roosevelt's dreams in both domestic and foreign affairs. I believe he left his presidency faithful to that intention. Perhaps the, many ways, most memorable domestic single event in Harry Truman's long and marvelous presidency was the election of 1948. The election of 1948 has long since achieved a kind of mythic status among those who know and care about American politics. Everyone knew that Truman would lose that election. The polls showed, the press delighted and reported, the pundits knew it, members of Truman's own staff were convinced of it. The Democratic Party was split into thirds and the rest of the country rallied around Mr. Dewey. Everyone knew Harry Truman was beaten, except Mr. Truman himself. Thomas Dewey's long lead and New Yorker ways, Harry Truman's Missouri twang, loud shirts, long, determined whistle-stop campaign, the pundits' overconfidence, Dewey's overconfidence, the premature headlines announcing Thomas Dewey's victory, the one correct forecast that made Louis Beam famous. All of these have entered the lore of American politics and become famous there. Most famous of all, of course, was Harry Truman's long nationwide whistle-stop trip, in which he traveled some 32,000 miles across the country by train, giving them hell, as he put it himself, and at each stop the crowds grew larger, from 5,000 in Albany to 50,000 in Indianapolis to 300,000 in Chicago. Still, popular opinion, as reported in the nationwide press, remained convinced of the futility of Harry Truman's efforts and smug in the certainty of Thomas Dewey's election. No one who was alive and past childhood, I think, young childhood in those days, will ever forget that night. I personally shall never forget lying awake in a college dormitory, not in Missouri, but in New York, at Barnard College, listening to the returns on the radio, too excited to sleep. In fact, for me, the election of Harry Truman in 1948 has a very special significance, because the decision to be for Harry Truman in that election was, I think, the first serious, independent political judgment of my life, and I have always been very proud of it. I was an undergraduate in those days at Barnard College in New York. Harry Truman was a very unfashionable candidate on Ivy League campuses, where most of the students were hereditary Republicans who preferred Thomas Dewey, or else they were romantic leftists attracted to Henry Wallace's prairie vitality, populist rhetoric, and quasi-Marxist platform. Known on campuses as a strong New Dealer, I was courted by the Wallace campaign very early on. I remember to this day attending a Wallace rally on the Columbia University campus, at which Pete Seeger played the banjo and Norman Mailer introduced the candidate, and Henry Wallace strode onto the stage with a forthright appeal to political paranoia. "Now you will all be investigated too," he shouted to the standing room only crowd. Radical chic had already made its appearance on the American political scene, with Henry Wallace blend of movie stars and messianism, and it siphoned off from Harry Truman a good many of those who were more concerned with aesthetics than with politics. Much as 2 decades later, the same sort of people would deprive Hubert Humphrey of support and victory in 1968. To this day, it seems incredible to recall the numerous group of those who, liberals in fact, in 1948 sought to dump Harry Truman and make Dwight Eisenhower the nominee of the Democratic Party. Harry Truman's effective liberalism was to Henry Wallace's Progressive Party what diamonds are to rhinestones. It was the real thing. His generous vision of the public good was to Thomas Dewey's respectable conservatism, as FDR had been to Herbert Hoover or Ralph Landon. And the times were just as critical. Fortunately for all of us and for the world, enough American voters understood the need for vision and understood, too, the difference between the real and the counterfeit visionary. And visionary Harry Truman surely was. His vision of domestic policy was as capacious as that of any American president in modern times, and his idealism in international affairs was surely as great as that of Woodrow Wilson. It's hard to imagine a more straightforward statement of an authentic liberal creed than Truman's description of what he thought his party ought to be. He said, "I've always thought that the Democratic Party should stand for a government that encourages a fairer distribution of the nation's prosperity, so that every segment of the population will have some access to the good things of life." He went on, "I was interested always in balancing the figures of the budget, as the record indicates, but I was even more concerned over balancing the human budget in this country. Thus, a commitment to civil rights, education, housing, medical care, opportunity for all, and the fair deal." It's hard to imagine, too, a clearer statement of the distinctive, exceptionalist American approach to world affairs than Harry Truman's when he wrote of this approach. "It is best demonstrated by the manner in which we treated conquered nations after the First and Second World Wars. We set up the means to feed and clothe and take care of the physical needs of people. We rehabilitated the conquered nations instead of attempting to keep them conquered and prostrate. We asked for no reparations." Truman wrote on, "Only America could take such a unique approach to world affairs. Our population, unlike that of other great nations, is made up of streams from every people around the world. And when we became the most powerful nation in the world, we tried to put into effect the ideals of all races and nationalities which we had written into the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. For all his extraordinary accomplishments, and almost everyone is coming to recognize them, Harry Truman did not impress his immediate contemporaries as deeply as those of us who are coming after him. Although historians of the period already sensed what the evaluation of Harry Truman would be. As my friend, the distinguished historian, the late Clinton Rossiter, wrote in early 1960, and he was a historian of the presidency, of course, I am ready to hazard an opinion to which I came, I confess, manfully, with dragging feet, that Harry S. Truman will eventually win a place as president alongside Jefferson and Theodore Roosevelt. The retrospective reevaluation of Harry Truman's performance is just one more example of President Truman's good sense. Do your duty, he said, and history will do justice by you. Thank you very much.